All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peya, Pei Gimel Halacha Aleph Daf Chav Vav. We will begin on Daf Chav Vav Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud. What we're going to have today is the Gemara is going to go back and expound every single part of the Mishnah. Doesn't hurt to quickly read over the Mishnah. The Mishnah on Daf Chav Hei Amud Beis on the top, beginning with the first case of Malbenois Hatfua. As we explained, a Malben is a brick. Malbenois Hatfua means if a person has bricks of a field of grain, meaning he had a tree field, steilah, or an orchard. The Mishnah gave an example of olive trees. The Gemara pointed out, B'Shem Rabbi himself, that outside of the Mishnah, he used to speak about trees. Doesn't make a difference what type of tree, as we finished learning in yesterday's daf. And in between the rows of trees, he planted patches of grain. So the question is, do we view the trees as a division between these patches, which will then necessitate each patch having paya left from it on it only for itself? That was the whole klal of the previous chapter. Or do we say that trees in such a configuration are not considered a division? It is considered one big grain field, and you can leave tfuah from any of the patches as long as you leave the correct amount for all of them. And that was a machlokes beishamai oimrim peyam mikol echad bi'echad and beisilul oimrim me'achad ala koil. So we're going to start today's daf by limiting the machlokes beishamai and beisilul. And as it obviously makes sense, don't forget, chevra, a fence, a gedder, even in an orchard, is considered a division. If not, now we're not even focusing on the trees, we're focusing on the grain. By a grain, the whole previous chapter began with many other types of barriers that halachically are considered a division. So we have to qualify how densely packed are these trees. Common sense. Are they very close one to the other? At some point, they will have a din of a fence. Mitzad sheni, if the trees are very spread apart, even Beis Shammai will be moida that it's not considered a division. So that's something that the Gemara is going to qualify. Then the Mishnah went on to say that umoidim, and as we said, Beis Shammai is moida to Beis Hillel. She'im hoyu rashei hashuros me'oravim, that if the ends of the rows merge, in other words, the trees don't fully cut through one patch and the other, but at the edges of the patches, as we'll learn and we'll have pictures, they are connected, then even Beis Shammai is moida, it's considered one grain field. Here also, we're going to have to qualify how much of the patches needs to be connected. Now, if you remember, we learned, we're going with the Daf Mambois V'Hadar on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. We're going to unpackage it more when we learn the Gemara. When we speak about bur, that it's a division, there was a question, how much of it is a division? Not kolshu. One of we had what appeared to be a machlokes, then we had a reconciliation. A shear that we had b'shem Rabbi Yechanan is 2 amas. Do you need to have the 2 amas or even a kolshu? Because maybe for division, you have to have a substantial division. For unity, even a little bit is enough. Beautiful. And then the Gemara is going to move on today to the second case, which is the final case of the Mishnah. And that is Hamanamed Esodeu. As we learned, the machlokes in our Mishnah between Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim, you planted one grain field. Aloma, the example we keep on giving, because the Gemara gives it, is that you did not evenly spread the fertilizer. And it's an amazing phenomenon that the more fertilizer, the quicker the product there will become ripe. The ripening of a product is also dry. Unripe product is lach, is moist. At some point, if you don't harvest the dry product, it's going to be overcooked. So you harvested the yavesh, and now you have a speckled field with lach. Here again, is it one? Is it two? Machlokes Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. And here again, in today's Gemara, we're going to learn what's behind the sheet of the Chachamim of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, "Peya mikol echad v'echad." Why pay mikol echad v'echad? After all, you planted one field of grain. Turned out that one became ripened before the other, which is why the Chachamim hold it's one field. And there's going to be different ways of understanding it. And we're going to be learning the Gemara at small daf. We can learn it slowly. You'll see how little the Gemara speaks out and how much the Gemara is implying. So there is the implication of the Havamina. And in the implication, we'll learn two options and all sorts of questions. And just going straight to the end, in the Hakdama, the Gemara says these words, that lach v'yavish shnei minamei. In other words, that the Gemara's final understanding of Rabbi Akiva is that the reason why Rabbi Akiva says, in the case of Hamanam Resodeu, peya mikol echad v'yechad, because when you harvested the yavesh, it's considered a different species. Lach v'yavish shnei minamei, and that's going to really, as we're going to learn, take away many inquiries that were left unanswered. We're going to learn in the Gemara that this statement is really, we're going to go back and we're going to show how that resolves all of the bayas that we're going to have. So there we go. And now let's go and learn this inside with God's help on top of the Am. So this is going back to the first case of the Mishnah, right? That we have the Malbenois Hatvua and Beishamai Oimrim Peya Mikol Echad V'Echad, because the trees are considered a division. Beisilal Oimrim Me'achas Alakoil, trees are not considered a division. Now we have to qualify this. Man nan kaimen. Wenn you was at Minda. The Gemara Mamish meant to write it in Yiddish. It just came out of Darton. Maran Kaimen. In Bemeruvachim, Revach refers to this trees being spread out a lot. There's a lot of harchava between the trees. How can Beishamai say that trees are a hefsek? There has to be a shear. Af Beishamai moide or moidai shu noisen peya me'echad alakoil. It has to be that way. Okay. Look inside the Maharafulda, on top of the Amid, the second, on top of the Amid, she'ein hoyilonois nikodim lahavsaka. Every word is gold. It's about heker. And hoyil v'rechoikim oid zemizeh doesn't look like a hefsek, can be a hefsek. Keep your finger on in the Maharafulda, because we're going to read it again in the next line. And on the other hand, the Gemara says, Sufim means the trees are planted very close together. At some point, it must be because the trees for sure will act as a fence. Let's read inside the Marafulda. No, I take that back. We're going to read the Marafulda in a moment. That's already the answer. In other words, the Gemara is beginning with the premise that there has to be a specific, more limited case. Only there do we have the machlokes. What must it be? So it clarifies the Gemara. Ella ki nan kaimen, mon nan kaimen is the kasha. Ella, none of us then. What are we talking about? And we have to share above, and we have to share in many other areas in halacha. B'netuya mata eser lebeisa, where you have trees that are packed in a density 10 for every beisa. So is in reference to how many seeds of a saw, for you to have land in which to plant seeds of a saw, you have to have 2,500 square ounce, 2,500 square ounce, 10 trees in that divided symmetrically, not packed here and empty there, means that around every tree you have 250 amas. And if you make the cheshbon, 250 times 10 is 2,500. That's the base. If you put them in a row, because they're planted in a row in our case, it chaps around 18 amas between every tree. Okay, if an amma is 1.5 feet, we're talking about, you make the cheshbon, 26 feet. It's good to have that picture. There's plenty of space. Nevertheless, if you have a row and in between every tree you have be'erech, these 18 amas, it's more or less. It's a bit more, but that's more like the shear. That is where you have a machloikis. Exactly there. Now let's read inside the Maraful. Now
Rabbi, didn't you say 2500 in between each?
I said 18 amas. 18 amas is around 26 feet. It's 18 amas. If I said wrong, then the coffee didn't kick in yet, then forgive me. That's what it is. 2,500 square feet, which means 250 for each one, which is around 18 amas, a bit more than in between every tree. Let's read inside the Maraful because you have different girsois here. Hachi garsin and beishamei of the law. Oh, let's read it then. So now, if you see inside the Gemara without the Marafulda, it's the opposite. So I'm reading the Gemara directly in the Marafulda. Beishamai of the law kiretzufin. It's considered close together, which is why Beishamai holds peya mikol echad v'yachad. Ubeisel love like emeruvachim. And why? So it's interesting that the Gemara doesn't have to explain Beishamai. The Gemara is not explaining Beishamai. The Gemara is only explaining Beisilel. And that is, Ubeisilel of the line, Kiberuvachim. Says the Marafulda, Beishamai makes them, the Girsel Beibir Tzufim. Beisilel makes them Minavach. Now, my Tama de Beishamai, I'm sorry, the Gemara is explaining the Tama of each one. Because this is the key of the whole Amid right now. In other words, the Gemara is going with the premise, that only Beis Shammai has to be explained. Because when you have 18 amas between every tree, how is that a fence? 18 amas, guys. A person takes up 4 amas. Person takes up 3 amas. When you extend your hand, it's a lot of space. It's a mud. Now you think about it. So it explains the Gemara because there are different ways of learning the Gemara, and I know that we have a relatively enough time, but it's going to get confusing. So I dafke would prefer not to learn the Marafulda, which is a whole different mahalach. Let's look inside that Asherilium. And by the way, that means, just for you to know, whoever's learning, this whole thing, the next few lines, if you want to learn it well, either or, it's a whole different mahalach. So the Rashirilio. So look inside the right column, around 5 lines or 6 lines from the bottom of the Amid, on the right column. These are the words explaining Dafka Beishamai. It's a physical thing. When you plant grain, it's gavaldik. Grain needs sunshine to grow. And therefore, and where do we know that from? We're never going to quote the Mitzias. We don't care. We care about the Torah. How do you know that the shade is bad for grains? Not because they don't grow. No, because it says Azoi in the Masech Zavei Zara. So we have a source. Now we know. And now Elo, this is the key. Elo lahafsakon nischavein. In other words, the trees are not an integral part of the field. Let me use these words. Yerushalmi, good words. In other words, if first of all, we said yesterday, just to repeat it, there's no issue of kilei zeroim. Remember that. Kilei zeroim are 2 types of grains, even 2 types of vegetables, not trees and tvua. Even be'eretz Yisrael, lechatchila, you can plant. Why would you do this? Since begashmias, the shade is not good for the grain, and even if it's 18 amos apart, there's still enough shade that it's detrimental for the grain. Is therefore muzmin zagin. You planted it, the keilu offense. You planted it for a fence. It's not part of the field. Part of the field would mean at least it doesn't get in the way. I don't need for it to complement each other. It shouldn't get in the way with each other. If something is getting away, you need to have a reason. Why are you doing something that's mazik? Muzman zagin, because you have another kavan. You want to keep them separate. That's the Gemara. The fact that you planted something that's not beneficial for the grain, you planted it for what other purpose? You can't say, I want to chaparayna, I don't want to lose space. You wouldn't do it because it's bad. I don't want to lose space. You don't want to ruin everything. You're doing it because you want to make a barrier. You want to make malbonis. You want to keep it separated. That's why it's mafsik. Not the space, the kavanah. Let's go with that. And guys, every step now, it's like yesterday, it's little words. You have to just speak it out a lot. We have a rule, right? Eruv and Daf Yud Gimel, when it comes even to Beishamai and Beisilo, that Elu ve'elu divrei elikim chayim. But halacha kebeisilo, that the halacha kebeisilo is not like when it comes to all of the other arguments Tanoim, where we also say Elu ve'elu divrei elikim chayim, but the halacha goes like with the whole sugya we had in the Babli. How do you know who determined the halacha? Because by the other machloikes Tanoim, we never find the expression which we find only by Beishamai and Beisilo, that Beishamai b'makim Beisilo einoi mishnah. That's unique. No, it's not just that the Baskol said halacha kibeisilo. It's more than that. Is that when you have a machlokes, Rabbi Akiva and Chachamim, it's Rabbi Akiva. It's one. Rabbi Yehuda, all machlokes in. Now Ma'aroim, Shlokish, Rabbi Yechanan. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel was a big group. That was the word. So if you're going to tolerate, that's the other opinion. It's going to be it's going to be two titles. So by Beishamai and Beisilo, ain't a Mishnah. And throughout Bavli and Yerushalmi, this is going to be beautiful. We're going to have now, the Gemara is going to quote a machloikis between Rabbi Yossi and another Tana, whose name I'll remember when we learn it inside. I don't think I looked ahead. I just read it in the Rashi earlier. We're going to have this, God will, in Daf Chavtes. Rabbi Yossi makes a statement that based on how you explain Beis Shammai, it's going to come out that Rabbi Yossi is only following Beis Shammai. And that's meant to be a kasha. Because Beis Shammai, in other words, this concept that even though there's so much space, it doesn't even look like a fence. Elama, the kavana must have been that way. And Bachlal, that fits the Rebbe's Hoz Leshito Sayo, Beishamai Beisilo, Koyach and Poyel. Koyach, that's the Rebbe sheet, and all of the Machlekes and Beishamai and Beisilo. Like, for example, Neidas Chanukah, right? Why does Beishamai say you light 8 the first night? Because the Nes Bikoyach was the greatest one, the first night, because the first night, that little bit had in it Bikoyach for 8 days. The second night, it only had B'koyach 7 days. Beis Hillel celebrates B'poyel. B'poyel, the first night was we don't even know what that nest was. Second night, there's a nest. Ooh, the third night, it's already burning 3 nights. B'poyel. In other words, the concept over here, that B'poyel, it's not a barrier. It's 18 amas. B'koyach means the kavana, the hidden. If that's the logic, now it's going to come out that Rabbi Yossi, that we'll say in a moment, is following Beis Shammai, and we don't want that for that. We cannot tolerate that. That's going to be the next line. So we're going to ask a kasha. So, but now that you explain Talmud Beis Shammai, and I'm going dafka with the Rashi earlier. Since it's mazik, since it's detrimental, so it must be that you had a ulterior purpose or kavana, and that is as a lahafsaka, so your intent lahafsaka, even though there's a lot of space, determines separation. I know that you have to get used to the signal. Talking to Shleima, who just came on board right now, because really, first of all, Rabbi Yossi came later. And the kasha is dafka in that direction. So it's going to come out that Rabbi Yossi, the Mishnah with the onions that we'll quote in a minute, it's going to come out that he follows Beis Shammai. No, we don't tolerate that. Now, by the way, another thing just to know, Rabbi Lazar, the great Rabbi Eliezer Shamutehi, and one of the titles of Shamute means he follows Beis Shammai. That's an exception. So you did have but it's a chiddush. It's something that we try to avoid. How is that? What Rabbi Yossi? Kamod the Rabbi Yossi Omar. As we'll see in our Gemara, it's going to be on Daf Chavtes in 3 days, God willing. That what does he say? I'm reading the words and then we'll read the case and then Asherili. That ein derech b'nei adam liyos machnisin b'tzolim bein hayerek. So what happened was like this: you have a vegetable field, a vegetable patch, and you separate. You have bricks of onions in it. Same case. Our mission was bricks of tvua bein ilonis. The case in Daf Chavtes will be malbenois habitzolim. I'm reading these words, three lines on the bottom of the Rashidol in the right side. And now, who is he arguing with? I didn't check up whether it's the Chachamim, whether it's another Tana, but we're going to focus only on Rabbi Yossi. That Rabbi Yossi Yoimer, like Beis Shammai, that what pei mikol echad v'yachad. Now, why did Rabbi Yossi say pei mikol echad v'yachad? Every onion patch, David, is considered simple, separate. Why? The second to last line, Kama de Rabbi Yossi Mishum, the Betzolim is mechacheshe liyarak. They weaken. See, onions are very good or very bad because they're very strong. So you don't want for the onions to permeate the tam of all the other Betzolim. It's not good for other Betzolim. No, it's having vegetables, this vegetable, this lettuce with that lettuce doesn't affect. But Solim brings down its taste. People don't do it. It's mamish the same logic. In other words, it's not good. If it's not good, then why did you do it that way? It's not one field. It's not in part of, let me chaparine and use all the space. No, if it's only to use all the space, you wouldn't plant two things that are bad one for the other. You did it lahafsaka. Hilkach, I'm reading the last line in the Rashidili. Hilkach yerach shementayim is kahafsaka chashivalei. And this follows the rationale of Beis Shammai, not about physical or appearance, about intent, about the bekoyach. So it's going to be, now the Gemara is repeating, doesn't that sound exactly like our Beis Shammai Oimrim? And we're quoting the words the Gemara gave in explaining Beis Shammai that and we got a problem with that. We don't want for Rabbi Yossi, and let me add even more than that. Forget about what I said to Shalom Akim Beisilo. When we learned the Klalim, what did we learn? Rabbi Yossi in the Mukay Imai. Rabbi Yossi in the Mukay Imai means that you should know as a big cloud, we paskan like Rabbi Yossi. That's even the worst because we paskan like Beisilo. Rabbi Yossi in the Mukay Imai means we paskan like Rabbi Yossi. We can't have it. So the Gemara says something so beautiful that when you have an alignment between two people, A and B, it's not always that if A holds like B, B holds like A. Not always. Could be A holds like B and B doesn't hold like A. Says the Gemara, you're right. It's mistabed now that we said in the time of Beis Shammai, the words of Chazal are, Ein derech b'nei adam li yois machnisim zroim ben ilanos. If someone were to ask you, why do you think Beis Shammai would hold by the onions? You're right. Beis Shammai would hold like Rabbi Yossi. But if you were to ask Rabbi Yossi, who do you hold like by Malbanois Hatvua, Lav Dafka, he would hold like Beis Shammai. He can hold like Beis Hillel and still say what he says. Why? Let's read it inside. Yes, Mistabra, the Beis Shammai, Yoidun, they will agree with, they'll be Moide, Rabbi Yossi. But only in that direction. But Rabbi Yossi yoydel Beis Shammai, Zok Gemara Beis Shammai yoydel Rabbi Yossi. Shekain ein derech b'nei adam liyois machnisim batzolim bein hayorek. Let's read inside the top Rashidil, the left column. Gavaldik bestam the Beis Shammai yoydel Beis the hoike the zeroyi tfuya b'nei lonois v'lei kaptim mishum tzeil. That's the key. That's the whole secret. Guys, there's a whole different way of learning this sugya. Who told you that the shade is bad? What happens by Gashmias, we really don't care. He's saying that's not so bad. Some people are makbid, some people are not makbid. It's not as bad. Onions are much worse. And think about it. If onions ruin the vegetables, so think about that owner. Why did he plant them together? It must be that for the owner, the vegetables are not important for the vegetables. He wouldn't ruin them. What's important is the onions. So why didn't he plant only onions? No, for some reason, that's the way he wanted to make patches. No, the kavanah was to use the vegetables as a division. That's why. Let's read inside the Gemara. But like we just had the words now of the Rashirilio, that some people plant grain beinei lonis. Some people do that. They're not that concerned about the shade. So even if you hold by the onions like Rabbi Yossi, you cannot automatically apply it to the case of the beginning of our Perek. Rabbi Yossi will hold like Basil, that the trees are not mafsik. They're not mafsik. It's 18 amas. That's not a fence. And some people don't care. Don't tell me the trees were planted to make a division between the two. No, the trees, I want the trees and I want the two. It's two separate things, and I'm hopping the space all right. Rabbi Yossi lo yidam b'shamai, because more people shekain derech b'nei adam, yes, lias machnisim zurayim bein oilanois. Gewaldig. Now the next line is very enigmatic. Very enigmatic. Again, there's different ways of learning it. And let's go with the Marafuld. I mean, every Gemara is different. Now, what are we talking about, guys? The Mishnah is speaking about Malbonois Hatfua. Malbonois Hatfua. We're focusing, it's a grain field. In between the grain, you have the trees. What happens if you only have one fence between, God did one fence in between the two? What does it mean, one fence? Says the Gemara that Kaman Dohu Ilan, that's certainly only like a tree. Now let me say something, guys. What did we come off? You have to cut the Gemara away. The Gemara is so secret. The Gemara began with the premise that the Mishnah is not speaking about trees that are planted too close together. There is space between them. The question is the kavanah. That was the way we just learned. If you have a grain field and you have a real geded, there's nothing what to talk about. The Gemara will not be making a comment, because even by a orchard, what did we learn of it? A fence is mafsik. The Gemara must be speaking about a fence that doesn't fully cut through the field. It does not fully cut through the field. So why did you plant it? Why did you put it there? Why did you put the fence there? Is it making a hafsaka? No. Did you place it bekavana? Yes. That's what we're talking about. If it's the godhead of the Gemara must be a fence that did not fully go through and through. And for that, the Gemara says, "Command who Ilan" means this is the machlokes Beisham and Beisilel. How great is that? Beisilel will hold that if the poil in the world, it's not mafsik completely, it's not called a division. Beishamai will hold, even though it's not through and through. But why would you put it there if not that you wanted to make a division? If your kavanah was to divide it, your intent divides it. Question. So, and that's for sure. What's the question? Shnayim. So first of all, Shnayim, the Marafulda begins by saying there's no such a gersa. And if you want to be goydus it, Shnayim tzricha. We had this many times, Rabbi Mendel. Tzricha means I don't know. Tzricha means we have to look into it. Tzricha is the way the Gemara would say teku. What will be the question? Now, why would two fences change? So let me tell you the way some suggest. That's why that we're speaking about dafke perpendicular two fence. So you have a big field, and it's a grain field, and you don't have anything going through and through. If not for sure, it's mafsik. You have a fence, you know the kavanah was to separate those areas, but instead of having one, you have two perpendicular. I wish I knew that word in Yiddish. And now, what's the kasha? Inside the two that are making an L shape, inside, there is an area that's fully separated. Or not, because you can plow everything by kicking around the fences. Just like the Gemara began by saying that if the density of the trees were less than one in the 18 amas, even Basila will be moida. There is a point. So that's the Shnayim. Okay, let's go back. Now, then the Mishnah says, Umoidim she'im ha'yirashi shurais. Rashi Ashuras means that the trees, right, 18 amas, 18 amas, 18 amas, but the patches are wider than the trees. The patches are wider than the trees, then even Beishama is made, it's one field. So says the Gemara, when is Beishama Moida? When they are me'oiravin from both sides. Before you turn the Amid, look inside the Pnei Moshe. Listen to Pnei Moshe. Now the Pnei Moshe, just to know the girsa that they printed here was a mistake. You'll see that the last 3 lines of the Amid are repeated word by word again on top of that Chavav Amid base. It's just a repetition. You see, it's a printing mistake. The Gemara is really asking that what the ad kan loishaman mas nisan ella im hoy moy rab mishniat sudadim the hachi mashma im hoy rosh yashurus mi'urav voice ulashan rabim zu in zu hare shoy mi'urav mitzad echad ma'ifta only mi'urav from one side mahu. Now you can turn the amid. Now instead of going mahu and to continue to read in the Pnei Moshe, scoot down 4 lines because it's repeating word by word. Mahu, you see the mahu on the 4th line, the line closest to the Gemara, there's a comma. Now keep on reading. I'm reading inside the Pnei Moshe before reading the Gemara. What does he mean? One way of understanding the boya, says the Pnei Moshe, is that it's not, me'oravin means interlocking, intertwangled, intervermischungs. It's going in. What happens if they're not going in, but they're going toward, they're touching? It's not mu'urav, but it's touching. That's one way of understanding the question. Or, says the Pnei Moshe, inami, you have it, that at kan lo shomanu elo, shoy me'orav mikan umikan. So lashon navi. Maybe it's only if it's mixed on both sides. That's the way you would see the pshat. It sounds like more like this. What happens if it's only mixed from one side? From the other side, it's still separated. It's only mixed from one side. You need to have both. You have a patch. If Kavan would have been awake, it would have been better. If we have a patch and patch, do they have to be mixed on both sides? Or only one side? Let's read it on side. Then what? Garnish, that's the way the Gemara talks in the Yerushalmis. They're very mekatzit. Like, at least say the words, my. Not even that. Kanamizing. Now, there's another question. And the other question is, and that's what we referred back on Daf Yud Ches, when the Mishnah and Pedig Beis David was speaking about a fallow land that's separated, fallow land, and how much does it have to be fallow? So b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, he used that expression b'shloisha tulamim shel pasiach. When you make, there's furrows that you make, and then we learned all those details. There's furrows that you make at the later stage, which are smaller, but when you ground break the first time, the furrows are wider. The width of these three tulamim shel pasiach we learned before is 2 amas. So for them, me'oiravim, do you have to unite the same shear needed to divide, which is oy b'shloisha tulamim shel pasiach, which we didn't answer whether it is from one side or 2 sides. Aside of that, they have to be united. How much do you have to have 2 amas united, or for division you have to have a 2 amos division. It's a more beautiful way of looking at things. It means it's harder to divide. By uniting, even if it's only kol shehu, then maybe that's also considered united. Invited, that question here is unresolved. So when you ask in the world, is a union, is a achdus around one thing enough? I would say it depends on the people. Certain people, by Yidden, it's enough. Let's go that way. Okay, weiter. The second case, final case of the Mishnah was Hamanamer Sodeh. So first of all, the Gemara wants to explain the word menamer. And the word menamer is a nimra. A nimra is a leopard. And a leopard is a chaya that God created in nature that is speckled. And the speckles are not little tiny polka dots, but if you have a Gemara with pictures, if you're using the art scroll, you can see the Gevaldika pictures. That's what it means. And again, what happened is that you planted one grain field because of your application of the fertilizer in an uneven way, where you applied more, the wheat that grew there grew quicker. It became dry, i.e., ripe quicker. You began with the first harvest of that which is dry, but you needed to leave the moist, which needed to be connected to the ground. The Gemara, the Mishnah, Machlokes, Rabbi Akiva, and the Chachamim are not about the first harvest. They are considered one harvest, from which you leave one for all. And if you're using an art scroll, look inside the top picture. The white was the first harvest, and the black is what you left. So you harvest the white. There's no question. L'kula alma, you leave it one. Kasha will be, what happens if now, when you're now the second time, now that the moist became dry, now they are menumer, they're speckled. That's the machlekes, and Rabbi Akiva holds peah mikol echad v'yachad.
How big of a field are we talking about? Does it matter?
Doesn't matter. Says the Gemara like this: that mekoim hazavolin oilin tchila. Since the fertilized area grows first, so after you harvest it, what remains, the Gemara must make that point, is namrida kalila. They call the field a spotted field. But before we go on, I know it's getting a bit late. I thought we'll be able to go quicker. I have one simple kasha. If you remember, on Perik Aleph, Halacha Dalid, when the Mishnah said, Klal Amru Bepeya, and we had to have the 5 prerequisites for you to be chayiv and peya. Remember that? Has to be oichel, has to be nishmar, right? It has to be gedulav min haaretz, and these 3 are the same by trumas u'maisvis. And then the final 2 that are unique by peya is it has to be likitase ka'achas and machnisay likiyum. So let me ask you a question. It's not likitase ka'achas. Why b'chlal do you have to leave peya from the speckles? You didn't gather them together.
That it could grow all together, no?
So Rabbi Mendel is saying what many say because it could grow all together. The Tosfos Yontif has a very unique take from this Gemara on the Kitase Ke'achas. What was the example the Gemara gave, or the Mishnah gave? A fig tree. On the same tree, it's not ripe on the same time. Says the Tosfos Yontif, when you have a stalk, look at every stalk like a tree. On every stalk, there are many ears. There are many grains. On the same stalk, it's always going to be ripe at the same time. Okay. So now, Zok the Gemara again. Now we have a kash. And we're going to learn that the Gemara's question will be answered. Question is, Ad Kedoin, what the Mishnah is speaking about is Kashoy Yavish Mekan Mikan, which is, like I mentioned, the white and the black. First you harvested the white. Then you harvested the black. Why is this important? Look inside the Pnei Moshe. Look at what the Pnei Moshe, 2 lines under the Gemara, in the widest lines. At Kedoin Boyi, this is really Akasha. At Kamu Shamanu the Plea Rabbanon Le Rabbi Akiva Masnisan Elah. Kishoy Yavish Mikan Mikan. And Velach Be'emtza. Now the Tama, the Mestabru Hu Loimer, it makes sense that they argue only in this case, which means Mishum, that because when the dry part, which is ripe first, is on the sides. Now, guys, the white is all connected. You see, the white is all connected. The black is what's not connected. The lach is not connected. The koitzrei batchila umaniach esmakim alach shu beemtza ein nidek shtei sados. We're speaking about harvesting the white. The white is not like two fields. Elo the koitzrei sa yavish koidem uch shchad. And therefore, it makes sense that the Rabbanan hold, since you began to harvest everything in one shot, you only left places, but your first harvest was like one continuum, excluding the speckles. Even when you do the speckles, it's considered one, but keep your finger in the Pnei Moshe. Question of the Gemara is, but ho yolach mikanu mikan. What happens if you put fertilizer point in the middle, like a big chacham? You make speckled fertilizer dots, which means that when you harvested, you only harvested the speckles first. And the yavish is be'emtza. Now what? On whom are we asking? Let's read inside the Pnei Moshe. Mi nema de bechai gavne moidi rabbanon l'Rabbi Akiva. That what? The kiven shu koitzer batchila sayavish shu be'emtza umaniach asmak malach shu mikan mikan. So mechzek ishtei stadois nechlokois. When you begin to harvest the speckles, you never began with one continuum. You began a little, and therefore, they will think that you planted it in patches, and maybe the Rabbanan, even the Rabbanan, will be moide that what? No, it's in the top picture. You began to harvest everything together. You don't even pick up your plow. So it's one harvest. You couldn't do the whole thing. Whatever you do later is like everything goes after the head. Everything goes after the beginning. But in the question of the Gemara, in the boy of the Gemara, when you began, you never began in one continuum. From the beginning, it's a piece. Maybe the speckles have to be paid, each one for themselves. And let me word it this way: do you go after how you planted it, or do you go after you harvested? If you go after you planted it, then even in the second case, the Rabbanan will hold peya achas alakoil because you planted it all together. If you look at the harvesting it, then even the Rabbanan will be moed. So that's now. It sounds like the boy was not being resolved, but the way they learn, the way the Marafulda learns, the way the Rasharilia learns, is that what the Gemara is going to say in the next line, and we're going to finish the next line now. The Gemara really means to answer the boy by saying, let me say it by heart, that the Rabbanon is not about, and the Rabbi Akiva, it's not about how you planted it together. It's not about how you harvested together. It's not about that. It's about a whole different rule. What's the different rule? What did we learn in Perek Sheni? L'kula alma. When you plant two different minim, you have to give payah from every min on itself. Remember that? Even if you make them into one goyden. It has to do with how do we view lach and yavish? How do we view? Is it two minim or one min? The Gemara doesn't word it that way, but that's the way they all learn pshat in the Gemara. So says the Gemara that you should know that Rabbi Ba, which is Rabbi Abba, and Rabbi Chia, they both say in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. They make another statement. What's the other statement? That Asya, that Rabbi Meir, Bishitas, Rabbi Kiva Rabbi. So guys, we had on here Adaf Zayin Amud Beis. Guys, how couple remember this? Remember how Koitzer Lashachas? You have one field of grain, and when you harvest for animal fodder, the two already reached a third. But you don't have to wait until it gets fully ripe because it's for behemoths. So the case of the Mishnah was you took a strip down the whole field from one end to the other, and you harvested it lashachas. So now the question is, do we view now each side of the field as the same or the like? The Meir mafsik, and the Chachamim oimrim eino mafsik elim kein charash. So came along Rabbi Yechanan and he said Gavaldik, because we know Rabbi Akiva, right? After Rabbi Akiva went through with the challenge that he lost all those Talmidim, the greatness of Rabbi Akiva, that's really, according to some people, what's like Bo'emer? What are you celebrating? That they stopped to pass away? That's not a celebration. There was no one left that passed away. It was unlike Bo'emer that he went to get his new 5 Talmidim. That was that we're celebrating the koyach of Rabbi Akiva. So one of them was Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir, right? So Rabbi Yechanan says that the Rabbi Meir that says Mafsik follows Rabbi Akiva. Now, how did he link it? Look at the beautiful words. He says that Kamoy the Rabbi Akiva Aman. Lach v'yavish neminim. That's the words. That's the key. Not, it's not about your kavanah, and it's not about what you harvested or how you planted it. It's about halachically, moist and dry are 2 min, which means the chachamim hold they're 1 min. In both cases, that's the end. In both cases, the chachamim will hold me'echad ala koil. And Rabbi Akiva will hold in both cases. That's the big chiddush now. That even in the first case where you harvested the big white in the picture, you have to give from that for itself, and then from every speckle for itself. Now here's that is why Rav Meir said in the previous chapter that how beautiful is that? Let's read inside the Marafuld and then we'll go down. Asya that Rav Meir normally held after Zainam the Veza Koitzel Shazava Mafsik Ba'afal Gav Hakol Min Achadu. And when did you plant it? V'loy zara acha shalom hayapsuk. Ela mishum the Marafuld the Sfirlei Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Dalach V'Yavashnei Minim V'Hasa Mohoyel V'Koitzer Halach L'Shachas U'Miskayim Yaveshim Hava Leishnei Minim. Beautiful. In other words, he's quoting from the Rash Ilio that this is answering the previous inquiry. In both cases, there's going to be a machlokes. Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim will stop over here. God willing to be continued.